who had previously agreed to spend the night with me. She never showed up, and the other wenches, who giggled to each other and flashed their gums in flirtatious grins, did not entice me. So, I was sitting quietly in my seat against the wall. I always like to have an unimpeded view of any establishment I find myself in, enjoying the tang of the sweet gale-flavoured ale when the door opened. The girl who walked in was somewhat more inviting than the other whores, and the way she conducted herself quickly convinced me she did not share their profession. All the same, I refrained from going over to her, since I still hoped the red-headed wench might show up. A thin man, dressed in a peasant's coat, did decide to approach her. I recognized him as the monastery's archer from the few times we'd run into each other in the chapter house. His name was Edred, as I later learned. He immediately sat down beside the wench and started gabbing away. Even though she apparently turned down his offer of a drink, she still seemed to listen to him, although I did notice her eyes straying over to the door at regular intervals. I had just emptied my tankard when the door swung open again, revealing 3 young men. They headed straight for Edred's table, where he had just made the girl laugh about something. They were solid-looking boys, those 3. They had broad shoulders and chests, with upper arms like my thighs, and they strode purposefully across the packed dirt floor to the table, where the girl was the first to notice them. She smiled at the boy in front, a Saxon with flaxen braids hanging down his back. She offered him her hand with a gesture more suitable for a relative than a lover. Edred leaned back and stared into space, apparently too wise to provoke 3 strangers by looking them in the eye. All the same, one of the other 2 stepped forward and leaned menacingly over the table. Only those seated nearby could hear what he said to the archer, but Edred's flush of anger and pursed lips gave me a good idea. I watched the archer rise with an exaggerated slowness, making it clear that like everyone else in the tavern he was armed. Then he calmly walked across the room. I was convinced he had yielded not because of fear, but because he knew he would get the worst of it if it came to blows with the 3 boys. In addition, he was the monastery's archer, and subject to the abbot's rules. No one in the service of the abbot was allowed to get into fights. Maybe everything would have gone better if he hadn't turned around after a few steps to nod farewell to the girl. It was an innocent gesture, but nonetheless provoked the 3 rascals, who didn't hesitate to step forward and grab hold of him. My assumption that his retreat was not due to fear of a brawl proved correct, because as soon as he freed himself from their grasp, his hands were up and ready to fight. The boys closed in on him right away. The one in front took a swing at the archer's jaw. Edred dodged him, while hammering his own right hand into his attacker's breastbone. The guy faltered but managed to stay afoot, and with a muffled oath, the first boy who had spoken to Edred launched forward to punch Edred in the gut. I briefly contemplated whether this fight was any of my business, but of course I knew I couldn't just stand by as a passive observer and let one of the monastery's men be beaten to a pulp just for speaking to an attractive wench. So, I reached across my table, grabbed the tankard of the man sitting closest to me, and jettisoned its contents into the attackers' faces. Then I followed up by smashing the tankard itself into the back of the closest attacker's skull. That one collapsed to the ground with a hollow cough. The other 2 looked around in confusion, a blunder that allowed Edred and me to each fell a man, after which we stepped outside and strolled away down the street shoulder to shoulder, without saying a word. That was the beginning of our friendship, which was further solidified when I entered the chapter house the next day to testify about the incident in the pub. Those 3 gamecocks had accused Edred of assaulting them. I testified that this charge was baseless, and that, to the contrary, it was they who had attacked Edred, who had conducted himself as a perfect monastery layman in every regard. Edred's friendship had made my days far less plodding. I often rode out hunting with him. I never did learn to be as good a shot with a bow and arrow as he was, but I was better at letting wild boars